Hi, I'm Emily and welcome back to the Pepper Knits Knitting Podcast. I'm a knitter based in Perth in Western Australia, and thanks for joining me for episode 23. It's been quite some time since I filmed my last episode and quite a lot has happened. I've had some very exciting life updates and quite a lot of knitting time as well. So I have a fair few finished objects and some very exciting whips to share, and also one really fun acquisition. I can't wait to talk about it, and I'm definitely going to need all the advice I can get from you. I'll save the life updates towards the end in case you're just here for the knitting. I feel like I'm going to be talking for quite a long time, so I better just get into my first finished object. This is the Calm Down Tee designed by Lily Kate Makes and is my first finished object. I knit this out of Sandnes Garn Duo, which is a 55% merino and 45% cotton DK weight yarn. And typical me, I've gone for the brown colour, which is like my safe colour. It's one that I know I get a lot of wear out of and just fits into my wardrobe really well. I knit this t-shirt in the second size for the body, but I did go up to the third size for the sleeves, just because previously with set-in sleeves, I've knit the same size as the body and as corresponds to my bust circumference, but they always turn out too small. So for this one, I did just go up to the third size. The last time I shared this t-shirt, I think I was working on the first sleeve or maybe the second sleeve. I was working on one of the sleeves anyway, and I had also realized I was running out of yarn of the original balls that I had purchased. So I did go and get another one, but unfortunately, it was a different dye lot, and to me it was quite obvious that they were different. So I did have to make the decision to only use that one for the ribbing, and it did kind of limit the amount of yarn that I had to knit the stockinette. So I did have to go back and reknit the collar. I had originally knit it with the same dye lot, but yeah, I just went back and reknit the collar. I also then did the cuffs and the hem on the body in the new dye lot. I did have to also lengthen the ribbing on the body. I think I mentioned previously I was kind of worried about it being way too cropped, and because I didn't have enough yarn in the main dye lot that I was using, I didn't really feel comfortable adding length in the stockinette. I think the longer ribbing still fits in with the overall look of the t-shirt. I think the original ribbing is meant to be the same length as the collar and the sleeves, so you can see I definitely added in quite a few extra rounds. But yeah, because it's on the body, I don't think it looks too disproportionate. I'll quickly go through the construction of this t-shirt again in case you haven't seen my previous episodes. But it's basically a saddle shoulder with a set-in sleeve. So you basically start with this ribbing panel here for each of the saddle shoulders, and then you join them together and work some short rows to shape the back and then the front neckline. And yeah, essentially just join everything in the round together for the body. There are also some gentle decreases down the side of the body. They say gentle in the pattern, but to me, they are quite noticeable. I definitely wouldn't say it's like aggressive shaping, but yeah, there are quite a few decreases in the body. The 1x1 ribbing also continues down the sides of the body, which I think is a really nice detail. And yeah, I quite like those little design features. And for the sleeves, you pick up like you would for a drop shoulder and are essentially just working like a lot of short rows to shape the sleeve cap. And because they're just short sleeves, that's essentially all there is to it. And then you just knit the little cuff at the bottom. I definitely would have preferred the body to be a little bit longer, and if I had enough yarn, I probably would have omitted the decreases. But saying that, if I had done that, it probably would have been even more cropped because I would have run out of yarn sooner. I can try this on so you can get a rough idea of the length of it. So I'm wearing this with relatively high-waisted shorts, and you can see it just about meets the waistband of these shorts, so I definitely wouldn't want it to be any shorter than it is. I would have liked it to be a little bit longer just so it doesn't lift up so much when I lift my arms and I'm moving around, but unfortunately I just didn't quite have enough yarn for that. I also feel like it bunches up a little bit strangely around here, just with the waist decreases and where it finishes on my body. It kind of just gives a bit of a balloon effect, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but if it is laying flat like this and I'm not moving, it looks a lot better. So technically I said this was a finished object, but I have a feeling I might go back and make some more changes to it. The sleeves are kind of what is putting me off from wanting to wear this. I finished this a few weeks ago and then I went away for a couple of weeks, and when I came back I'd honestly kind of forgotten that I had finished this, and normally my freshly finished objects are the ones I'm most excited to wear, and it's just a shame that I wasn't excited to wear this. I put it on the other day and the first thing that was bothering me was this extra fabric around the sleeve and just overall how baggy the sleeves are. I really don't think it suits the overall look of the garment, and to be fair to the designer, it is intended to have fairly fitted sleeves. So that's kind of why I assumed I would have to go up a size in the pattern just to have fitted sleeves that weren't way too tight on me. Unfortunately, that has not worked out for me on this occasion. As I was knitting this and before I'd blocked it, I could kind of see the excess fabric that was sitting around here. I don't think I've knit a size too big. It fits me fine across the fullest part of my bust. I just feel like it's at the front armhole here where there's just too many stitches. I think if I had knit the second size, that may have alleviated some of that and cinched the armhole in just a little bit. So I'm hoping that if I rip out these sleeves and knit as per the pattern recommends for the size that I was knitting, hopefully that will fix a little bit of that. There are also some decreases included in the sleeves which I omitted for my version. I was worried it was going to create a bit more of like a puffy sleeve, but seeing how this is constructed now, I think they were actually intended to avoid that from happening. To me, this does kind of bow out a little bit, and then with the cuff cinches it in just a little bit, and I just don't really love how that looks. So I think having the decreases along the front of the sleeve here just kind of brings it in a little bit to match the slope of your arm. I'm not too sure when I'm going to get around to fixing up these sleeves. I would like to do it in the not too distant future so I have a chance to wear it and style it a little bit before it gets way too cold to be wearing a t-shirt. But at the moment I just don't really have the motivation to do it. In terms of the yarn, it's not my favorite, and it's probably not one that I would reach for again in the future. I do find this a little bit itchy. I haven't worn this for more than a couple of minutes at a time, so I have a feeling it's maybe just because I've only been wearing it for a little bit and then getting way too hot and wanting to take it off because it's getting itchy. The yarn is advertised as like an alternative to a 100% wool for people who can't tolerate that, and usually I'm okay with a lot of 100% wools, especially a merino like this that feels quite soft in the hands. So I was quite surprised to find that it is a little bit itchy on me. I do just want to give it a second chance in some cooler weather though and just see how I go with it. I also just think I'm not really a DK weight summer knits kind of person. I do find that I just gravitate more towards my 4-ply summery garments like my t-shirts and my tank tops, so something noted for in the future when I'm knitting t-shirts, probably just stick to the 4-ply patterns and yarns. The other thing about this yarn is that the rowing out is super visible. Occasionally I get a bit of rowing out when I'm working things flat, but 99% of the time that is basically fixed with blocking. But for this, it's so visible and it's really obvious to me, and it kind of bugs me. I especially notice it around here where I've been working the shoulder bit flat, and yeah, it didn't go away with blocking, but that is another thing that puts me off from wanting to use this yarn again. Overall, this is not a hugely successful project, but I think redoing the sleeves will hopefully make me like it a little bit more. I think most of the things that I don't like about it are probably just the yarn and the decisions that I made. I think if I had stuck to the pattern, I maybe would have been a little bit happier with it. So I'll see how I go with redoing the sleeves. And if I still don't like it at that point, I will probably just find someone who will actually get some wear out of this. The actual pattern was written quite well, and yeah, I didn't have too many issues with reading through and following the instructions. I did also mention this previously, but basically the sleeves are just all short rows because it's basically just the sleeve cap, and they are written out in tables, so it makes it really easy to follow along and check off each set of short rows that you're working, depending on the size that you're doing, and then also incorporating those decreases. So I'm not too worried about having to knit the sleeves again because it was a very easy process and quite enjoyable as well. And of course they are just short sleeves, so it really doesn't take that much time. That is everything I have to say, I think, about my Calm Down tee. My next finished object is this teeny tiny baby romper, which is just so cute. This is called the Sunday Morning Romper, and I knit my version in Patons Dreamtime Merino. It's quite an inexpensive 100% superwash merino that's very easily available in Australia. I really like these two colours together. This is a gift for a colleague of mine who has very recently had a baby. I just haven't had the chance to gift it to her yet. She had a baby boy, but I feel like these colours are really gender neutral, so it makes it a little bit easier to pass along to different family members or friends down the line once this baby has grown out of it. I knit the size 1 to 3 months, and this pattern comes in a huge range of sizes from like teeny little preemie newborns and I think up to 24 months with quite a few increments in between, so it's a really versatile pattern. It does also have instructions for knitting it with long sleeves, but I did just go for short sleeves, mostly so I could just get away with only purchasing one skein of each colour of the yarn, and also just so it's probably a little bit more wearable when baby is probably at the age where this will be fitting them. My hope is that this will be a good layering piece, even though it is 100% wool, to keep baby warm because it does have short sleeves. It can be layered with like something else underneath it for the really cold days, or just worn by itself on slightly warmer days. There are a few things that I changed about this. This is the second time I have knit this pattern, and just from that I made a few things that I thought looked a little bit better. I did change the bind off for the sleeves and also on the leg holes. I don't know, I can't remember what the instructed bind off is in the pattern, and I think I tried it. I just felt like it wasn't stretchy at all. I may have been doing it incorrectly, but I did just end up going for Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off because I know it's stretchy and I know it looks good, so in the end I just swapped out for that one. Also on the bottom here where you're doing the decreases, I did just shift them over by a stitch just so you can have that nice single stitch along the edge here, and it made it a little bit easier to pick up stitches for the leg holes. For the leg holes I also picked up fewer stitches. I can't remember exactly how many, but I think I may have done like a 2 and 3 pick up on the slopes and then maybe 1 stitch in this part here. It's been a little while since I knit this, but I know I definitely picked up fewer stitches. I was just worried about the leg holes flaring out a little bit too much, and I thought that's probably important for them to be fairly close fitting. I didn't obviously want them to be tight, but I think they should be okay. And then the bottom I ended up adding buttons. For the first version I knit, and I tried it for this one as well, I had some like metal poppers, but with this yarn, because it is quite stretchy and elastic, when I tried to undo them it just stretched out a whole bunch and it was really hard to undo the poppers. So I did just go back and add the buttons, but that was very easy to do. And I think they still look quite cute. There is also a tiny little button here to tie up for the collar. But yeah, I think this is such a cute little baby knit. It's kind of become my go-to baby knit for people I know who are expecting. I'm also super impressed with this yarn, considering how inexpensive it is. It is super, super soft, and I think it is really good for baby knits. I also double checked that it is definitely machine washable, and I even put this through the washing machine instead of like soaking it in water to wet block it, and it came out completely fine. I think over time you might get quite a halo forming around, and you can definitely see a little bit of that forming now. But yeah, it didn't felt at all, the colours didn't bleed, so I was quite impressed with that, and I think this will be like my go-to yarn and pattern combination for baby knits in the future. I did try doing joggler stripes down the centre back, and I did the method where you just slip the first stitch of the new colour on the first round that you're knitting it. And yeah, I think with 2 row stripes it's definitely not the most invisible method. I think for 2 row stripes there's probably not really a method that looks completely neat and invisible, but it's on the back and it's for a baby, and I really don't think either the parents or the baby are going to care that much. I think it was worth it to get these really cute 2-row stripes. In case you're curious, I did 6 rounds of brown and then 2 rounds of white. So hopefully it won't be too much longer before I'm able to gift this. My next finished object has been on the needles for quite some time, and this yarn has been through many different projects and ideas, so I'm really glad that it's finally in a finished object and something that I'm really happy with. These are my bright pink pajama or like loungewear shorts that I have been working on. This project was mainly just to get the yarn out of my stash. It's been in my stash for over a year at this point, and it was kind of an awkward amount. It's like a worsted weight 100% bamboo yarn, so it's really soft. It's got a really nice drape to it, but I only had 200 grams, and I think each 100 gram ball was 165 meters, so it was just a kind of an awkward amount, and I didn't think that knitting into a top or something would be what I would reach for. It's definitely a very bright and loud color and not something I would see myself wearing every day. But I feel like as a really fun, kind of silly project like pajama shorts, it just works really well. I didn't use a pattern for these shorts. They're kind of like self-drafted / very loosely based on a pattern that I've knit quite a few years ago. Essentially, I just cast on at the waistband and then knit until I was happy with the length of the waistband, and then I also included some yarn overs here to have the ties run through. And then I knit the waistband back to the cast on edge, and yeah, just got into knitting the shorts. Essentially it's just a 2-stitch raglan that runs down the centre back and the centre front, and then I eventually split off and knit a tiny little bit for the legs. They are very short shorts, so I probably won't be trying them on, but they are so comfortable. I've already been wearing them for a few days around the house in the afternoon where I just want to be comfy and I really don't care what I look like, but I do think these are really fun. So it wasn't until I finished them and blocked them and then tried them on for the first time that I noticed that the balls were 2 different dye lots. And yeah, I'm not really sure how I never picked that up. I don't think they're hugely different, so that's maybe why I never noticed, but you can definitely see a line somewhere across here. This is like a slightly darker dye lot compared to this, and then also down here it changes back to this one. I think because I had knit this yarn into things previously, I had cut parts of the first ball and didn't know which bit belonged to which, so interesting that you can see it now that they're different dye lots. But really that is not a big deal, and it's not something that bothers me one bit. I knit these, I think, on 5mm needles, or maybe it was 4.5. I think it was 5mm needles. So it's quite a loose gauge, but it was quite comfortable to knit. And yeah, it's just like a really soft fabric that it's created. It was getting kind of boring working on these towards the end, so I did just take them over to my friend's house, and she was doing some sewing and I was just sitting there working away on these whilst we were chatting. And then before I knew it, I had like basically knit to the length where I wanted. In hindsight, I maybe should have split off the legs a little bit earlier just so I could have made the actual leg part a tiny bit longer, but that's okay. I don't really feel like going back and changing that. I basically used every single bit of yarn that I had. When I got to the point of splitting for legs, I weighed what I had left and then split that into 2 equal balls, so I would make sure that I wasn't going to run out when I was knitting the second leg. I then just did a regular bind off in pattern to create kind of like a rolled hem, but I think with this yarn, because it is 100% plant-based, they don't roll up a huge amount, which is probably a good thing. Ideally, I would have liked to have had a matching I-cord tie, but I just didn't have enough yarn, so I did find this hot pink ribbon, which I think matches it pretty well and definitely leans into the pajama shorts aesthetic of these. Even though they're fairly short now, even after a couple of wears, they have definitely grown a little bit. So hopefully they'll just continue to grow in length as I wear and wash them as well. So yeah, I was very pleased to get those off the needles. I have one final finished object, and I don't think this was shown on the podcast at all. It was just a bit of a random cast on, I guess a bit of a palette cleanser and something to just use up some of my scrap yarn. I knit this really cute cabled beanie using some leftover Bendigo Woolen Mills Classic 12 ply from the Nordlund sweater that I knit at the end of last year. It didn't use up all of the scraps that I have, so I do still have a little bit left over, but you know, it was good to get at least some of it into a project. I very rarely knit hats because I very rarely wear them, so I don't really know what made me want to knit this. More than likely, I'll probably just end up gifting this to someone who will want to wear it. I do really like the colour and the combination with the cables though. I think it looks really classic and also a fairly gender neutral hat as well. Although I have to say it's on the tighter side, even for me, with a pretty small to average size head. So the pattern I used is a free drops pattern, and I don't remember the last time I used a drops pattern. I've heard some pretty harsh things about their patterns, and maybe for good reason, but I thought for a hat it can't be that complicated, so I followed along the pattern. It's called the Cabled Calm Hat, and I think it is designed for like a 10 ply yarn with 4mm needles. Because I was using this 12 ply yarn, I did go up to a 5mm needle just so I wouldn't completely, hurt my hands and have a really tight gauge on this, and I think the gauge worked out fine. I think it has a really good density to it, especially because this yarn does bloom up quite well when it's been blocked. I felt pretty comfortable using the 5mm needle. To account for my larger gauge, I did take out quite a few pattern repeats. I think there's meant to be 9 pattern repeats, and I just ended up going for 6. I did also look at another free pattern. I think it's Joji Locatelli's A Twisted Affair. It's another free beanie pattern with cables in it. I just preferred the look of these cables, which is why I ended up going for this pattern. But it was helpful to refer to that pattern because it is, I think, a 12 ply pattern as well, just to judge the stitch count and see how many repeats I should probably include for this hat. So it was helpful to be able to refer to that free pattern as well, just to make sure I was on the right track. Maybe one day I'll eventually get around to knitting that pattern as well, but I was just in the mood for cables that looked like this instead. This was a super quick project to knit up. It starts with a 2x2 brim, and I did knit the first row. I did a long tail cast on and then knit the first row and then joined in the round. So essentially it looked like it was inside out, but then when I flip up the brim it shows the nice edge of the long tail cast on. Hopefully that makes sense, but it's a very easy modification to do, and I think I learned it from the Mostly Knitting podcast. She has also knit a lot of the Twisted Affair beanies. That was how I found out about that pattern. I was really in the mood for knitting cables, and yeah, I really like how classic these ones look. They're 4x4 cables, so I wasn't able to knit them easily without a cable needle, and this yarn on metal needles is quite slippery. So yeah, I did just end up using a cable needle. And even then, I do remember it being quite harsh on my hands. In hindsight, I probably should have taken a lot more breaks or put this down for more than I did. I probably worked on it, every day until my hands were starting to hurt, which is probably not a good idea. And yeah, I really need to be cautious of that and just remind myself to put something down if I feel any kind of discomfort and then come back to it like after a week or so. I was just really enjoying working on this, and I kind of wanted to see what it would look like when it was done. So yeah, it is a little bit snug on my head even after blocking. I didn't stretch it out at all with blocking, I just laid it flat to dry. I think I said earlier that this is a superwash yarn, and I've said that before, and then I've had someone correct me and say that the Bendigo woolen mills are not superwash treated, so I have to remember that when I'm talking about this yarn. For me, it does behave kind of like a superwash yarn in that it has a tendency to grow and stretch out quite a lot with wear and washing. So because of that, I'm not too worried that this is a little bit snug. And yeah, I feel like if I wanted to gift it to someone with a bigger head than me, I could probably just stretch it out a little bit more before I give it to them. I quite like the shape of this. I never really wear hats, alone ones with like excess fabric up here. But because the fabric is, quite stiff and a fairly dense fabric, I think it sits up really nicely, and yeah, I quite like how it looks. Those are all of my finished objects, so let's move on to my works in progress. My first work in progress is the one that has been getting pretty much all of my attention, and I'm having so much fun working on it. I have pretty much almost finished it, and I haven't even shown it on the podcast. This is the Clara Cabled Rib Sweater designed by cl.knits on Instagram. This is the first time I have knit a pattern from this designer, but when I saw it on Instagram, I absolutely fell in love with the cabled rib. Basically, all of the ribbing has this beautiful cable design all over it. I love how unique that was. It wasn't something I had seen on designs before. Yeah, and I was really excited to knit this pattern. The yarn I'm using to knit this is Drops Lima in the colour Beige Mix. It's yarn that I have frogged from a previous project. I had knit this into an arrow sweater by Petite Knit. As much as I love this yarn and the colour, I really don't think it suited that pattern and construction of sweater. It was a saddle shoulder pattern, and I think I just had a bit of a weird amount of ease. I didn't really love the shape of the neckline, and it just had a bit of a weird drape to it. I don't think the yarn really suited the structure that you need for a saddle shoulder, so I just never really reached for that sweater and decided to frog it and knit it into something else. So I'm knitting the second size of this pattern. The suggested ease is 20 to 30 centimeters. I was kind of hoping to be able to go for 30 centimeters of ease, which is what is shown in the sample picture, but I just wouldn't have had enough yarn, and I'm kind of cutting it close with the second size, although I think I should be okay. But yeah, definitely if I was going to knit the third size, I would have run out of yarn. In the last episode, I had shown the swatch for this pattern, and I was really excited to cast on. I cast this on as a little bit of a honeymoon project. I took this down with me when we got married, so we were away for 2 weeks, and this is pretty much all I worked on, and I have such lovely memories attached to working on this. And yeah, it was the perfect project to have a little bit of interest working on it, especially for the drive. It's like a 3-ish hour drive, so it was something nice to work on, but also a lot of plain stockinette that I could still sit around a table and chat with people and engage in conversation without being too rude and distracted by my knitting. So when I spoke about knitting this pattern in the last episode, I mentioned I would probably modify the collar just because it looked really wide in the sample photos, and some of the projects I saw in Ravelry, I just didn't like how low the back of the neckline was sitting, and just overall I didn't love how big it was. So I did originally pick up fewer stitches for the collar. I think I picked up 1 fewer pattern repeat and knit the collar like that, bound off, and it looked terrible. It was way too tight. I could only just fit it over my head, and yeah, it was bunching up a huge amount and it just looked really bad. I don't think any amount of blocking would have fixed that. So I did have to rip that out and re-knit the collar. So this is basically just following the pattern as well, which I was quite surprised about because to me this just looks like a standard crew neck and it doesn't look too wide, and yeah, it fits perfectly when I have it on. I will mention that I had to drastically reduce my pickup rate to get the right number of stitches. I'm not really sure what happened there. When you're knitting the front panels, you are just knitting to a certain centimeter of length rather than a certain number of rows. But saying that, if anything, my row gauge is longer than what's in the pattern, so it doesn't make sense to me how that happened, but that's okay. It worked out in the end, and I think it looks good, and there's a very minimal amount of bunching, especially in the back. It looks a little bit bunched just because I was picking up, I think, 1 in every 2 stitch here, or I wasn't picking up every single stitch, but I'm quite happy with that bunching. I feel like that will block out to be completely flat. So this is a drop shoulder sweater, and it has this beautiful cable that runs all the way down the shoulder, and that continues down the side of the body as well. Yeah, and I just really love that detail. I feel like it's been really popular lately, and especially just being this nice simple cable, it gives such a pretty detail. I am a little bit concerned about the fit and like the length of each part of the yoke. You might be able to tell it's sitting kind of weird on the hanger. Yeah, I just feel like it's not really sitting properly, and the sleeves are folding in a little bit weird. It's been like that since I started, and I did notice it before I'd even joined in the round for the body. and I was a little bit concerned about how that was going. So I did go back and double check all of my measurements and that I hadn't missed any section in the pattern, and I definitely followed it as it's written. So I'm just going to go with it and hope that blocking fixes all of these weird fit issues. When I actually try this on my body, it feels okay. The sleeves do take a little bit of maneuvering to get them to sit properly, but yeah, I'm really hoping that blocking fixes that. Otherwise, yeah, I don't really know how to go back and change that. I'll probably just have to rip back everything and start again. I think I was also a little bit thrown off because the front is meant to be shorter than the back, so the back just sits a little bit lower. It looks quite drastically different the way it's sitting on this hanger. I don't think it is quite that noticeable when it's on my body. So yeah, that did throw me off a bit, and when I was joining, I was thinking, like, is that meant to be the case? But when I went back and had a look at the sample photos, I could see that the front is intentionally meant to be a bit shorter. I'm not sure how I feel about that as a design choice. It's not something I have knit before, but I'm going to give it a go and just see if I like it. It might make it a little bit easier to wear this with skirts and dresses, so yeah, I'm interested to see if that's something I like or really don't want to wear. So this is how it's fitting, and yeah, you might be able to see the sleeves are kind of twisting around a little bit awkwardly. I just feel like it takes a little bit of shuffling around to get it to fit properly. So yeah, I really hope that blocking fixes that. I'm kind of thinking maybe the cable on the back is what's pulling everything up a little bit, and with a good block and pinning out, it will kind of help with the shoulder to drop a little bit. I also really need that to happen because the sleeves are way too short for me. This is where the sleeves are sitting right now, so I'm really hoping that I can block them out, quite a good amount. I am thinking that, yeah, once the shoulder drops down a little bit and I can hopefully block out a little bit of length in the sleeve, they'll be okay. I do really like how nice and roomy the sleeves are. They do have a fairly gradual taper, but the cuff is definitely not too tight. I think especially once this is blocked out to be in line with the rest of the sleeve, it will look really nice. So here you can see the discrepancy in the length of the front and the back. It's not a huge difference. It's quite subtle, but yeah, that really threw me off when I was working and like about to join in the round. But I'm interested to, yeah, see if that's something that I like. So I'm pretty much at the point now where I have knit the entire length of the body in stockinette, and I'm ready to start the ribbing on the bottom. It is quite a decent amount of ribbing on the bottom, so even though it looks quite cropped now, I think with the ribbing and then with a good block and stretch out, it should be okay. I don't want to go ahead and add too much extra length just because of yarn management. I have enough, I think, to do all of the ribbing on the bottom, but I don't want to push my luck and go way ahead and like knit way more than what the pattern suggests, just because I was cutting it, fairly close. It was comfortable, but if I go rogue from the pattern, I think I will be running out of yarn. That's why the sleeves look quite short, because I just knit them exactly to pattern, and I'm just hoping that blocking fixes all of this and yeah, makes it fit nicely. These cables, in comparison to the hat that I have recently finished, are so much nicer to work. Obviously it's not an all over cable sweater, so for the body I'm only working them down the sides. There's only one cable on each side, and the cuffs are quite a short circumference and not super long. It is a little bit hard on my hands, but not to the point where I feel like they're getting sore, just a little bit achy, and if I take regular breaks, I'm completely fine working these cables. I also find it's really easy to do these cables without a cable needle, so the cable rounds do just go by really quickly. I am so pleased I decided to frog the arrow sweater. I can already tell I'll probably reach for this a lot more than that sweater. I just think the yarn is much better suited to this type of construction. The colour is also light enough that you can see all of the cable details. I was a bit worried about choosing a slightly darker colour. Obviously it's not like a navy or a dark grey or anything, but yeah, I don't want to go to the effort of knitting cables if you're not going to see them, especially because the sample is knit in a really nice light grey colour that really shows off all of the cables. I'm very close to having this as a finished object now, so I just need to add the ribbing onto the bottom and then give everything a really good block and probably pin quite a few things out just to make sure the sleeve length is where I want it to be, you know, the yoke and everything sits nicely and is not looking too awkward. I'm also hoping the neck doesn't grow out too much, although I suppose I can always add some elastic into the bind off if I need to. The bind off kind of gives the impression of a tubular bind off, and I don't know exactly what it's called, but essentially you're knitting a stitch, putting it back onto the left needle, and then knitting two together, or purling if you're on the purl columns, and it gives such a clean finish to a ribbing like this. It's basically a 3x2 rib, so you wouldn't be able to easily move stitches around to be able to do a traditional Italian or tubular bind off, and this was so much easier. It's also way easier to frog back than doing a sewn bind off, so I might give this a go in the future, even for regular 1x1 or 2x2 ribbing. I really like how it looks. You are instructed to do the bind off on one needle size smaller, so basically all the stockinette I used a 4mm needle, and then the ribbing is done on a 3.5, and then I went down to a 3 for the bind off, just because I think it has a tendency to flare out a little bit. In the pattern, the designer says if it is flaring out and you're worried about going down too many needle sizes to make it not elastic enough, I think especially for the collar, there is always the option of adding elastic in afterwards just to make sure it stays nice and stretchy. Overall, this is such an enjoyable project to be working on. I really love working on 4mm woolly sweaters like this. I kind of wish I lived somewhere where they're more wearable most of the year round, but they're just so enjoyable to knit, and also it means that I have a sweater out of my wardrobe that I wasn't wearing but can replace it with something that I'm excited about. As I said, that was kind of my main project for the past couple of weeks, and the thing that I've been putting most of my time into, but I do have two other small works in progress that are new, I think, to the podcast. I don't think I've shown either of these on here. One of them I was talking about at the same time, I think, as the Cabled Rib Sweater. This is the beginnings of a poet scarf by Sari Nordlund. I am knitting this in one leftover ball I had of Juniper Moon Farm Herriot Fine. This yarn is 75% alpaca and 25% polyamide. It's a fingering weight yarn, so I'm holding it double for this scarf. And I think I like how it's coming along. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about this. The lace is quite fun to work, and I'm not someone who typically knits a lot of lace or, like, you know, shawls and things like that. So it's nice to be doing something different, but I can absolutely not knit this without looking at the chart. Every single row I need to refer to the chart, so it does mean it's quite slow going and not something I can work on mindlessly. So I just feel like when I'm sitting down to knit, I'm more likely to reach for the sweater rather than picking this up, so it hasn't had a huge amount of progress. This yarn is incredibly soft, it feels super luxurious, and yeah, I really love the yarn, but I'm just not sure if I love how it's working uphill double at this gauge. I just feel like it's not got the drape that this yarn has a potential to have, if that makes sense. I knit my mum a Sophie scarf using the same yarn in a different colour. I held that double and that blocked out beautifully, and I think that's kind of what I want for myself, but I just didn't feel like knitting another Sophie scarf. So I kind of got up to about, I think, this point here, and then I wet blocked everything just to see if that would change the fabric and the drape, and it's definitely helped a little bit. It did open up the lace, obviously, and yeah, give it a little bit more drape to it, but it is still quite a stiff and dense fabric. It's not so dense that it's really difficult to knit on, and I am still enjoying it, but just thinking ahead, I don't think it's really what I envisioned for this yarn. I'm not 100% sure what I want to do with this. It's been on the needles for quite a few weeks now, untouched. I'm just not inspired to be working on it. As much as I like the pattern and the lace is really fun, I don't think I'm going to like the finished object, so that's just not motivating me to want to finish it. The pattern is designed to use up one ball of the Knitting for Olive Merino mohair, and they're 250 meters per 50 grams. This ball was a little bit on the lighter side. It was only 98 grams, and this is 400 meters per 100 grams. So I'm kind of worried about running out of yarn, especially with holding it double, and I really don't want to do that. It's not the kind of pattern with all of the lace repeats where you can just easily finish early, like a Sophie scarf. You can't really knit just halfway and then start decreasing. So yeah, you can probably tell I'm leaning towards frogging this and doing something else. My main plan at the moment is to knit this again with just one strand and see how we go. I'm hoping that using the same needle but with one strand of yarn will give me that drape that I want and have a bit more of a looser gauge and hopefully not turn out super tiny. So yeah, that's kind of my plan at the moment. I'm not really sure if that's exactly what I'm going to do or if I do just want another Sophie scarf with this yarn. I think it is a really beautiful pattern, so it would be a shame not to knit it up. But yeah, I'm just not really satisfied with how this is going at the moment. But if you have maybe any other ideas or thoughts on what I could do with that yarn or, you know, another little scarf pattern, I would love to hear your suggestions. I have one final work in progress and it's a pair of socks, but only just. I haven't really worked on these much at all. I think the most amount of time they've had worked on them was on Sunday, and we went over to our friend's house to watch the Formula One, and yeah, I brought these along and got a little bit of work done. These are a pair of vanilla socks, and the yarn is really what I'm excited about for these socks. This is a skein of Hedgehog Fibers sock yarn, and classic Hedgehog Fibers is just, you know, an explosion of colour. I bought this going on 2 years ago now when we visited Adelaide. I went into Yarn Trader and wanted to get something out of my comfort zone, and it's just sat in my stash ever since, and I've been so undecided about what to knit with it. I thought about doing a tank top or a bralette or something, but I just really don't think I would wear something in this many different colours. It's just not my typical style. Eventually I settled on knitting a pair of socks. I did actually originally start knitting these in 1x1 broken rib just to have something a bit different so I wouldn't get bored with plain vanilla socks. But with all of the really rapid colour changes and the big variety of colours, I didn't really love how that was looking. So I did just rip back and I'm working a plain vanilla sock instead. I did do a 2x2 ribbed cuff, and this is a 56 stitch sock on my little 2.25mm needles. It's been a really long time since I knit a vanilla sock, apart from the little shorties that I knit not too long ago. But yeah, since I knit like a full length vanilla sock, it's been a while. But I think when I'm ready to be knitting on these, or if I just need a little project that I can take around somewhere, yeah, these should go by fairly quickly. The yarn is 90% merino and 10% nylon and is 400 meters per 100 grams. And yeah, it feels really nice. I think it definitely, you can notice the extra bit of merino in there and the tiny little bit of nylon. It does feel really nice and soft. I'm hoping that won't mean that it pills a huge amount, but realistically that's probably the case. I don't think I've knit a pair of socks with this base from Hedgehog Fibers before. I have knit a pair with the high twist sock, which I think is a BFL base, and they have held up really well and don't really pill very much, so hopefully this will be the same, but I think being merino might not be as lucky with this base. At least having so many different colours will hopefully hide most of the pilling in them. But yeah, I'm looking forward to eventually having a nice pair of fun vanilla socks. Those are all of my works in progress. So moving on to my acquisition. I was in a charity shop a few weeks back and my eyes found the Singer logo on something and I had no idea what it was. I just saw the logo and I was like, need to investigate. When I got closer and opened up the box, I realised it was a Singer knitting machine, and I knew at that moment it was going to be coming home with me. I did and ah for a little bit, but it was only $100. I have no idea the value of these machines, but I felt like that was a good deal, and it's something that I've been interested in for a little while, but I just never thought I would own one. I thought it was a perfect opportunity to learn something new and have a hobby kind of adjacent to my current ones, but yeah, also be able to learn some new skills. When I bought it, I had no idea if all the pieces were there, if it worked, or what kind of condition was in. I have absolutely no experience with knitting machines. The only close encounter I have had with a knitting machine is watching Engineering Knits videos here on YouTube. And they're absolutely fascinating. I love how she goes into more of the technical details about fixing her machines and how they work. And yeah, it's just very interesting. So I'm glad that I have my own one now that I get to play around with. It's a Singer Memomatic 321 machine, And based on some very brief research, I think it was quite popular here in Australia in the 70s. So I assume it was made somewhere in the 70s or maybe the early 80s. It is in quite good condition. I have had a chance to kind of sit down with the manual and go through the different parts and learn how it works a little bit. And I think it looks like it's in really good condition. Some of the plastic is a little bit brittle, but the main components of the machine seem to work really well so far. I haven't actually got to the point where I started knitting on it yet. I've put all the pieces together and had a quick look through it, and all of the parts look like they're very clean. They've been very well maintained. Some parts like the handle and things are still wrapped in the original plastic, so I think the previous owner took really good care of it. The one thing I think that's missing are the clamps to attach it to the table, but everything else looks like it's there, and from a quick Google, it looks like they shouldn't be too hard to replace. I did post on my Instagram story that I had gotten this and asked for any tips or advice that anyone could give me, and I had quite a few really helpful responses, so thank you if you were one of them. And if you have any other tips, please let me know, like anything to do with the knitting machine, on maintenance, setting it up, how to store it, like beginner patterns, what kind of yarns I should be using. I have done very limited research, and it looks like one of those things that there's not like an abundance of information on online. So yeah, if you have any tips, I would be really grateful if you would share them. The one thing that almost everyone has said in either on Instagram or what I've seen online is the sponge bar that the needles rest against should probably be replaced, and I think based on my research, it's something that just naturally wears out and needs to be replaced regularly anyway. So I have taken that out of the machine, and it didn't look as bad as I was expecting. To be fair, I've run the carriage across the needles a couple of times and moved the needles, and they felt like they were okay, but I didn't want to get it going and like start knitting in case I damaged something before I had replaced it. So yeah, the sponge looked okay. It's definitely worn down quite a lot, and I'm just going to replace it anyway, but it wasn't like crumbling apart and making like a horrible noise or anything. So I'm quite impressed on how well this machine has held up over the years. I am so excited to get stuck into properly learning how to use this machine. It looks okay. I feel like this is manageable. I think being able to knit like by hand will make it easier to learn how the machine works, but I know it's still going to be quite a learning curve. I've read through most of the manual and it all makes sense in my head, but I think it's going to be tough when it comes to troubleshooting if things aren't working as I'm expecting them to. But yeah, I'm just excited to be able to learn something new. I've had a quick look on Ravelry as well and seen that there are quite a few machine knitting patterns available, so I think I'm just going to have a look around for something plain and beginner friendly, just to get me started. Maybe something simple like a beanie or a scarf, and just see how we go. That is pretty much all of the knitting content I have to share today, so thank you for getting through to this point. I feel like I've been talking for ages, but I do have a little bit of a life update to share as well. So last weekend I got married, and it was the absolute best day we could have asked for. It went so smoothly. We had such a fun day. We got married in the southwest of WA, about a 3-hour drive south from the city. It's quite a famous wine region, so there's lots of greenery and bushland, and we're very close to the coast as well. So it was perfect weather. It did rain a lot 2 days before the wedding, and it made me a little bit nervous. The rain was supposed to stop the day before, and pretty much for the whole day it held out. We had a light sprinkle during our speeches, but it very quickly cleared up, and yeah, it was absolutely perfect. We had both the ceremony and the reception at my in-laws' place. They have a beautiful bush block down in Margaret River, and we were very grateful that they were willing to basically give us their whole place for the day. I was so happy to finally be able to wear my wedding dress and show it off. I'm so glad I went through all of the effort of making it. I'd obviously made so many, like countless number of toiles and mock-ups and changed things here and there, but even so, when I got to the final dress and we're using the materials I had, I still changed a few things along the way. And I also don't think I realized how long it would take to do all of the final details, like sewing on the appliques on the bodice, and I also had to attach a lot of the scallop trim onto the train to make that continuous. And just all those little details took a lot longer than I was expecting. I also did get to wear my Cara wrap cardigan that I had knit. I'm not sure if I have any photos of me wearing it because I was wearing it just at the end of the evening. The music had finished, we weren't dancing, and then I felt the breeze on me. It wasn't super cold, but yeah, it was nice to have a cardigan just to wrap myself up in whilst we were sitting down and chatting. But we could not have asked for a better day. I don't think there's anything I would have changed. It was everything that we'd hoped for. We were very grateful that so many people decided to take the trip down there and book accommodation and take the time off work. But yeah, it was just so special to be around all of our loved ones. We then stayed down in Margaret River for the week after the wedding as a little bit of a mini honeymoon. I'm so glad we decided to do that. I didn't expect to feel so tired afterwards. Of course, I loved the lead up to the day and the planning and organising things. We absolutely needed that week to decompress afterwards and just, you know, enjoy that first week and relax. So we're both back at work now and back to reality, but I do miss being in routine when I'm not in it as much as I enjoy being away. It is nice to just come back and you know, be in my typical surroundings and be back in my routine. We basically spend the whole week at the beach, going to wineries, having some nice lunches, and just relaxing and yeah, enjoying being down there. Thank you so much for watching until the end. As always, I would love to know what you've been working on or what you're planning to cast on in the near future, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye!